Yeah, it's hard right now as a Penn State fan to not feel really good. You come into the season. I think you and I both predicted 9-3. Most people were 9-3, 8-4, maybe 10-2 if you're super optimistic. But here you are at 11-2, champions of the Rose Bowl. The only games you lost came against two teams who went to college football playoff. One of which, in the Ohio State game, you honestly should have won. Um, and outside of Purdue, who, as you and I were talking off air, if not for a late, really bad throw by Sean Clifford that resulted in a pick six, and you probably in turn didn't still win that game by double digits. That game aside, you won every game by double digits. Penn State didn't just go 11-2 this year; they won 11-2 in dominating fashion. Even today in the Rose Bowl against Utah, I know the final score was 35-21, but quite honestly, the game was not that close. Utah got a late touchdown against essentially a bunch of third strings and walk-ons on the field for Penn State on defense. Um, yeah, and I know people talk about the Cam Rising injury. Personally, I don't want to hear it. When first off, Cam Rising doesn't play defense. Penn State's offense is completely pants Utah's defense second half. And also with Cam Rising, when he left the game, when he got hurt, Penn State was winning, which last year Ohio State cannot say. And no one questions that Ohio State Rose Bowl victory, and they came back and beat Utah without Cam Rising. And while Cam Rising was in the game, Utah was just marching up and down the field on Ohio State. So yeah, I don't want to hear that stuff. Just a great victory for Penn State. This is probably a topic we can get into, but to me, this is one of the three best wins James Franklin has had as Penn State's head coach.
Oh, easily.
And now, you look ahead to 2023, and like you had said, that hype train's rolling, man, because you lose very little off this team. And yes, you lose your quarterback, but the backup quarterback's more talented than he is anyway. And that's no knock on Sean Clifford. Drew Lar is just really damn good. Yeah, this team is going to enter 2023 with playoff expectations and with playoff level hype.
Precisely. I should know Cam Rise. Yeah, he was cutting, tearing up on the ground. I lost count how many times he managed to escape on third and long situations and pick up yards with his legs. Definitely, I understood in that moment how opposing fans felt for the last 4 years watching Sean Clifford evade pressure and pick up first downs when it seemed like they had him dead to rights. So I finally understood that. But looking at his stat line when he got hurt, obviously, he had 56 yards and 9 carries, but his passing stats were pretty pedestrian. He was 8 of 21, 95 yards. He did throw a touchdown, but he also had costly interception. I say costly because it ended up leading to Penn State's first points of the game. And so it's like I said, it's not as if it was any guarantee that Utah was going to win the game, especially the way Penn State's offense was playing. And we'll definitely get into that soon. But I think it definitely would have been a much closer game, no doubt. But I think it's still a game where Penn State probably puts it away late fourth quarter as opposed to, end of the third quarter. I mean, you could tell after the first possession for the backup quarterback, Bryson Barnes. I mean, it was pretty clear after that first drive that Penn State hadn't figured out. And, they could basically, stack the box, just try to take away the run game and just force him to beat you with his arm, which, he wasn't capable of doing. Like, he threw a pick himself. And even though it didn't lead to points, it was kind of foretelling that, he was not going to be able to pull a Sam Darnold and, sling his way across the field to a comeback win in the fourth quarter like the Trojans were able to do 6 years ago. So it was odd. I just, to have a calm feeling, like being relaxed, most of that second half, just knowing with the way Penn State's D was playing and, the way the offense was rolling, they were, it felt like they had the game relatively in hand. So definitely not something I envisioned when I was writing my prediction on this game. But yeah, let's talk about the offense though while we're at it. Sean Clifford, last game ever in a Penn State uniform, and he played like it. You see the stat ticker down there. It's 300 yards, a couple touchdowns, had that 88-yard bomb to Keandre Lambert-Smith, which blew the game open because it was at that point it was still 21-14, and then now it's Penn State's first 2-score lead of the contest, and for a team like Utah that relies so much on its run game, that was kind of, and it was down to their backup quarterback. That was like the kiss of death almost. And then, of course, Nick Singleton, who obviously before that, he broke open the tie game in the second half with a 87-yard touchdown run, which, if Kajana Carter and Saquon Barkley's iconic Rose Bowl runs had a baby, maybe it would look like touchdown run. But those really, I think those two big plays that really set the tone for Penn State and were a big part of, why they ended up winning this game and why I think they still would have ended up winning this game even if Cam Rising never goes out of the game.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I'm with you. I think if Rising stays in the game, I think they still win. They probably don't put it away as easily as they did, but Cam Rising wasn't going to be out there covering Keandre Lambert-Smith. The Nick Singleton touchdown run, which, I said at the time, I said early in the game, it was on Penn State's, I think, second possession. They were backed up inside the 10, and Singleton came real close. He came real close to go 90-plus yards. I said in our Slack channel, I said a couple other friends in text messages that Singleton's got a big one in him today. You can see it.
I remember that. Yep.
Yeah, and there it was. He
called it, man.
He ran himself into Penn State lore and into Penn State history the way Kajana Carter and Saquon Barkley did in the Rose Bowl. And then that Keandre Lambert-Smith pass, I mean, first off, Sean Clifford, tip of the cap to you. No one has been more critical of you than you're in your Penn State career probably than I have. And you went out with the best game of his career. The first half was the best half of football I've ever seen Sean Clifford play. And good for him to get to essentially rewrite his Penn State legacy, end on a high note, and end where fans are going to remember him fondly. Because ultimately, as critical as I've been of him, he probably should be remembered fondly. So good on him for that. That touchdown pass to Keandre Lambert-Smith, even though KLS looked to pull his hamstring at the end and missed the rest of the game, I'm sure he'll take that. It's the last game of the year anyway. But to me, that's one of those things that you got to look at that one both in the micro and the macro view. In the micro, that was a touchdown that put the game away. Like you said, at that point, Utah's offense was hopeless. Getting up 2 scores was big. But on the macro, if you look ahead to next year, you really need Keandre Lambert-Smith to step up a receiver. He's got the skills. He's got the tools. He's got the ability to be number 1 receiver. Well, if you take his performance against Michigan State in the regular season and his performance today, you combine them, his last 2 games of the year, he had 8 catches for 207 yards and 2 touchdowns. And he looks like a guy who's finally turning that corner. And good on him. That's good for Penn State. So, yeah, I think there was a lot of good to come out of that. And just it was a very exciting game as a Penn State fan. Yeah, just a great way to cap off a tremendous season. And, to me this year, it's fitting because both ended in the Rose Bowl, one with the Rose Bowl victory and one with the Rose Bowl loss. In a lot of ways, there were some similarities in 2016 to this year because no one expected that 2016 team to do what they did. 2017, when they won 11-2 and won the Fiesta Bowl. 2019, they won 11-2 and won the Cotton Bowl. People expected that. No one expected them to do what they did in 2016. No one expected this team to win 11 games and win the Rose Bowl. And, sometimes those seasons that you don't expect to end the way they did in a positive way, where you just blow past expectations, are so much more fun and so much more enjoyable than the seasons where you have high expectations. And that's what the season was. And especially down the stretch, I mean, their last 4 or 5 games, including this, Penn State won by an average, like 23, 25 points, something like that. They bludgeoned people coming down the stretch, Utah included. And again, the Cam Rising thing, I know people are going to point that, but Penn State they were physical. And the Cam Rising injury, not to make light of it or anything, I mean, obviously the kid's okay. It's not going to hurt him long term. He was on the sideline, joking around, laughing after he got knocked out of the game.
Right.
It was a physical play. Zakee Wheatley came up from safety and just lit him up, and he rolled his leg up on the play. And it's been a very long time since we've seen Penn State play a team the caliber of Utah and out physical them, and Penn State out physical them today. on the defensive line, Chop Robinson and Adiza Isaac could not be blocked today. They were more physical and manhandled the offensive tackles for Utah. So it was just good to see Penn State take that step as a program, take that step as a team, and just out physical a very good, very well coached Utah team. Because again, like we've said, no matter what would have happened with Cam Rising, I feel very confident Penn State would have won this game.
Oh no, and speaking of Rising, I see this comment from Larry here. Losing Quaife, I was looking it up. It's Brant Quaife, tight end for Utah, and Kincaid refers to Dalton Kincaid, who was Utah's starting tight ends. I'm guessing those are their top two tight ends. But yeah, neither of them played. We know Dalton Kincaid was hurt and had to skip the game anyway. But yeah, you already lost key guy, and then also on defense, I know they were missing their best cornerback, Clark Phillips, the second, and so you miss a couple of key players. It's rough enough, but yeah, and you lose your quarterback, who's, I mean, geez, he's like the engine that makes your offense run, and yeah, it's definitely gonna be devastating. So, but
I mean, you mentioned Utah not having guys coming into the game. I mean, Penn State, Joey Porter Jr. opted out, who is an All-American cornerback, maybe the best cornerback in college football, and Olufashinu,
John,
and Landon Tangwall, two starting on. Maybe they're two best offensive linemen. Honestly, didn't play in the game either. So it's not like Penn State was, fully healthy and ready to go either. So I think that's something that should be taken into consideration there as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tim. It's Keithy. All right, it's Brant Keithy. For those of you who didn't know how to pronounce his name, thanks, Tim. Yes, Adam, I agree. The future is bright, and let's see. Today's January 2nd as we're doing this. We have exactly 8 months until Drew Hour's first career start at home against West Virginia to open the 2023 season. Marty, I know you of all people especially can't wait for that.
Yeah, the hype train for Penn State, with Drew Aller being a big part of it, will be full steam ahead in 2023. I just you look at this roster, you look at what they bring back. There are very few holes. Maybe wide receiver, but if Keandre Lambert-Smith steps up, you add a guy or two in the transfer portal as expected. That's taken care of. I think this 2023 team can be the most talented team James Franklin has had since he's been to Happy Valley, which is saying something. You look back at 2017, which a lot of people probably point as the most talented team he's had. The big difference was in 2017, you look at that defense, there was no true game wrecker on it. You look at the next year, you're going to have Abdul Carter. You're going to have Chop Robinson. Denai Dennis Sutton might be in that boat. You're going to have multiple guys who are true game wreckers on that defense. And your quarterback play, no knock on Trace McSorley. As I've said before in the show, in my opinion, Trace McSorley is the best quarterback in Penn State history. Drew Aller can do things McSorley could never do. He can do things a lot of NFL quarterbacks could never do. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun this offseason. It's going to be a lot of hype, and just it's going to be a great way. I mean, the hype train was going to be barreling ahead for Penn State, even if they lost today. But for them to win, and to win the way they did, just in dominating fashion for the most part, this was a game 3 minutes into the fourth quarter. You kind of knew Penn State was going to win. Yeah, and it goes beyond the roster. You look at this coaching staff. I thought Manny Diaz just made tremendous halftime adjustments. Mike Yursich, tip of the cap to him. I thought he had a tremendous game. The first quarter, did a great job of going to tempo to get Penn State's offense in rhythm. Once the offense was in rhythm, started to flip-flop between tempo and slowing it down, which was just giving Utah's defense fits. Some really good play designs to counter the aggressiveness of Utah. A couple really good drawn-up screens, a couple of counter runs to where Utah then had to dial back the aggressiveness, and at that point, they were not nearly as good because Penn State was much more athletic and talented than Utah on the outside. And when Utah couldn't continue to be super aggressive, which a big part of that, like I said, was Yursich's play calling and play design, and Clifford wasn't getting pressured, we saw receivers running around wide open all afternoon. I mean, if it wasn't for a drop by Trey Wallace that he will tell you he should have had, it could have really been a big day by Sean Clifford, and Penn State probably would have gone over 40 points in this game. So, yeah, I thought tip of the cap to Mike Yursich. I thought this Rose Bowl was one of the best called games he's had as Penn State's offense coordinator. It helps a lot when your quarterback plays probably the best game of his career, and your wide receivers were phenomenal, just stepping up, making one tough contested catch after another. It just truly was a game where very little didn't go right for Penn State. And it's fun to get games like this anytime, but to get it in the Rose Bowl, that's something a little extra special, I feel. And
Yeah, I mean, if
missing, I didn't even think of Parker Washington about injury. Yeah, Penn State was also missing their best receiver with Parker Washington missing the game due to injury.
Yeah, and I mean, for not having Parker Washington, I said this in my prediction when I said, okay, I said 34-24 Penn State. That was my prediction. Of course, I was right now. I'm thinking, okay, it's like 27-24 late. Penn State goes on a drive and scores a touchdown to ice it. So I definitely wasn't picturing final score being like what it was and being a blowout. But with Utah scoring a late touchdown and a blowout to make it look closer than it was. But I did say my prediction that that Penn State already seems to have gotten used to life without Parker Washington, whereas Utah hasn't gotten used to life without Dalton Kincaid or Clark Phillips. That was part of my reason for picking Penn State, amongst other things. But